40% of white-collar jobs will be wiped out over the next 3 to 5 years. Know-how and knowledge is no longer an asset. Your identity is your asset. The message is your identity is a key economic asset, and it will give you an inner guidance of what you do in your life, where you actually use technology in a very positive way. Music is for me like a therapy. It's not like we're rehearsing, we're more playing. We human love to be with humans. And if I look at the recent study from Harvard University for many, many years on longevity, the factor number one for long life is social interaction. If I would go back as a young person, you need to first learn about what drives you, who you are, what's your personality, and what's your imprint. And you need to build on that because it's you. The first step is the most important one, and normally it's the most difficult one because you need to cut out.
Welcome back, everyone, to a new episode of Business Unbound. Every week, I sit down with exceptional practitioners who share the mental models, the frameworks, and the instincts that they have developed and acquired over the course of your careers. I'm your host, Florian Hof. Today, I'm joined by Florian Kemmerich. Florian is a global business leader, entrepreneur, and investor who has held senior leadership roles at companies including Brown, Stryker, and Olympus before moving into impact investing through firms such as Bamboo Capital and Palladio. Over the course of his career, Florian has worked across operating business, venture growth, investment management, and board leadership, which gives him a unique perspective on how organizations create value, scale impact, and develop leaders. In today's conversation, I want to explore what Florian learned along the way, how his view of leadership changed, what capital taught him about business, what successful people maybe misunderstand about business, and how he now thinks about building a life and career with real contribution. Florian Kemmerich, welcome to Business Unbound.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you and your community.
Florian, you have had a remarkably diverse career. I think this is more than fair to say, and I find that quite interesting. For listeners who may be meeting you for the first time, could you just briefly walk us through your background a little bit further and the key chapters of your journey?
Pleasure, Florian. So basically, I started... So we moved in the middle part of Germany to the Swiss border, close to Schaffhausen. And suddenly I was exposed to a different dialect, which I didn't understand. My father was a doctor, my mother was a teacher. And then in the village, growing up wasn't easy because I was an outsider. I was a snobby. I was the one who didn't speak the language. So at the age of 5, I got bullied and beaten. And again, I was asking myself why these people are so mean to me. But then my parents put me in judo. So then I had a 15-year history of growing up in judo. I ended up in the national team in the Bundesliga. I was prepared, also in a sports boarding school, and I was prepared to be for the Olympics 92 in Barcelona. And that's when I said, no, judo is not a way to make a living. And actually I had the dream at this time was for me to become a stand-up comedian. I had my art school already chosen, in Carnival in Germany, and I was on stage. We were between music and laughing, and you numb out the pain. It was kind of a cool thing. And then my father said, there are so many artists out there not making a living. Maybe you want to study something normal first, and then you can try. So I studied normal. I studied business administration, marketing, and I did an entry-level job in a healthcare organization. Goes back, my father was a doctor, looking at companies to join. That's how I ended up there. And I stayed there for 15 years. Yeah. And then at the age of 33, I had the success my parents wanted me to have. I was running a company, had a family in the home. And that's when I had an epiphany because in the corporation, my boss told me, Florian, maybe you want to fine tune certain things and you want to do a coaching. I said, okay, I'm fine for coaching. So basically I did a coaching in the company and learned about my inner child, my inner adult, and my inner parent. And I said, who's this? I had 2 chairs. I had to put, I'd been talking to myself, the adult Florian to the young Florian and vice versa. And I was really surprised by what was happening. And that's when I recognized that actually I don't know myself. I know that my education has given me the tool to make a living, but not to live my life. And that's when I had a pivot moment. I said, okay, I need to understand who am I? And I need to have my path. So I left the corporate job, joined did an entrepreneurial pathway. With different startups, fundraising, I call it my roller coaster life. And also did a lot of personal development methodologies in parallel to understand who am I. And that through serendipity ended up in impact investing, which was another pivot. Because for me, the quest was to do something which gives meaning to me. And that was really through my understanding. And when I learned about impact investing, where you use capital as a force for good. So that's, Florian, another pivot I did there, and basically went from a corporate job in healthcare to an entrepreneurial job in healthcare into impact investing. Now, in impact investing, a lot of people came to me and said, Florian, you do impact. How can I do impact? And my answer was, what's your vocation? And normally people do not know. Or if they know what their vocation is, they say you cannot make a living with it. It's just something you want to do good. And that's where I helped people to identify their vocation and then make it their profession. Many, many people, accomplished people and the young people. And then they asked me to write it down. So I wrote the book. And then last year, another pivot in my life. I did a management buyout of a company in the impact investing space. And basically, we had to turn the company profitable, and we flipped everything on AI. We automated back end everything. So the costs were 5 times cut down. Very different performance, but 70% of the people left, especially young people. That was in May last year. And I said, if with AI automation, you can lower your cost of doing business, everyone will do this. It's just a natural thing when you run a company that you want to run it as the leanest way possible. So you will have a lot of people losing their job, but also what happens with young people when they come out of university. And that's when I had another pivot and saying, okay, how can young people, especially my kids, I have 5 kids, the youngest are 17. Now they will study, they will not have an entry-level job. So they have to be positioned very differently. So that was another pivot where I then decided to digitalize my book. And I launched a agentic AI startup here in Geneva to help young people or people to identify to know their identity and then they understand how to make a living with it. Because I believe in the AI age, human agency is key. If you know what you want, AI is a tool. If you don't know what you want, AI is a crutch, and you will end up doing something through serendipity. And that brings you back to my loop. In a sense, that was happened to me because my education didn't tell me anything vocationally. So I ended up empirically looking outside with different pivots in my life.
And you proved my point here. Your career is quite diverse, and there are many different chapters in your career. Now, when you look back across these different chapters, to what extent would you say that there is a common thread that connects all of them, if there is one at all? What do all of these chapters have in common?
I love that question. And I can answer it now. I could not answer it early on. And it goes back to what I told you about being bullied when I was a young child. So in transaction analysis, every human being between the age of 2 years after the brain developed and 6 years, you experience something you do not like. And that gives your life meaning. And if you flip this is the main driver because it sets the stage, the meaning of your life. I call it the imprint. And my imprint was, I was beaten and bullied. And I wasn't afraid, but I asked myself, why do they do this? Why don't these people, rather than beating and bullying me, do something good? So that's the part where my leitmotif today is impact lives, share profits, where my main driver is to do for people, whether this is in healthcare, whether this is the entrepreneurial side where we did fundraising, whether this is in impact investing, where you use capital as a force for good, or whether this is now with vocating.ai, to help people to basically do good coming inside out. And that's where the thread is. I am inspired and my life gets meaning when I have conversations with people where when they understand and take an awareness of using their own power to provide the benefit to humanity or the planet.
I want to move a little bit further into the actual substance of our conversation today and explore with you a little bit the lessons that you have acquired over time from operating and leading businesses in particular. And if I understand you correctly, you spent quite a significant part of your career in operating and an executive's role, and then you went into startups, into investing, advising. What did that operating phase early on in your career teach you about business?
That's a good question. Yes, again, I have done a big portion of my life, 15 years in the corporation, climbing up the ladder and leading different teams. Yeah, and for me, always was the performance of the team comes through the intrinsic motivation of people. The more internal competition you have, friction you have, ego is in the way, the lower the performance of the team is. And that's what was actually for me a learning. If I go away from that, if people understand themselves, if your ego goes down, the empathy goes up, if the understanding of heterogeneous teams is the power of performing better, and that basically makes sense, that makes it the way that the team overall, and with a high intrinsic motivation and with the cohesion, looking at a greater picture, has two big effects. One is the performance is better. Second is the net promoter score goes through the roof. And I've done several turnarounds of companies, and these turnarounds of companies have had a lot to do always, not with restructuring companies down, and going to a low cost space and then rebuilding it again, but really how to go glass half full, how to look at how to drive performance of companies beyond that in a positive way. And that goes always back to the person itself, the people in the team, and the challenge they take, and how good they work together, and how to do that. And this, I can tell you many stories within my corporate life where I was put always on top of teams to improve, to do turnarounds and to improve the performance. And I come from a sales and marketing perspective. So look at the possibilities of how to make it grow. The same has happened when I came into companies, struggling, smaller ones, to do turnarounds, to help them do fundraising. It's always the same, that if you understand that it is not just your individual performance, but the performances within a team, and the better you understand each other, the higher likelihood that you will succeed.
So how do you actually achieve this? Say you're in a situation where the team that you have, the incumbent team, is not intrinsically motivated, that they are not interested in performance. How do you motivate them?
It's a very, very good question. Two things. If someone is in a job just to succeed individually and to climb up the ladder, so is focused on fame, fortune, and power, which is unfortunately the way we are educated to success from society. If this is happening, then you will have a lot of friction internally. If you come to a common goal where you have an alignment on a future and on getting an achievement as a team, that's very different. So for me, the first one is always, why would you be here? Why would you spend time? Sometimes you leave people and lose people, but if the motivation is not there, why would you stay with them? But very often, if you have a common goal and a common path, then people adhere to something. And then you have the power of psychologically also to the team go through. So it's a conversation to have one by one individually, but then you make an alignment on a strategy and an overall goal to achieve. And then you need to differentiate which are the people who really are here to do more than that and to want to have the team succeeding rather than just personally succeeding. Because a chain is only as strong as the weakest link. And therefore, it's very important that you first look at the links individually, and then you make sure that that the overall goal is understood.
And let's see if we can take this, let's say, fairly abstract concept on the one hand and bring it down to a concrete example. Now, if you think back about your career, does any particular example come to mind where you can explain how you applied this framework, this thinking in practice?
Yeah, there's several ones. So at my corporate job, for example, I was sent to a subsidiary which was at threat of losing huge business. They had a long contract of 10 years with a supply with the government, and it was a tail end on the contract. So for the company, either it was that we now would go out and build our own business and create the sales and the customers, or the company would just decide to close and shut down the subsidiary. And there, I needed to come in to tell the team that they need to change now. It's not just serving a big customer. It's actually getting new ones, individual ones. So life will be much harder to do. And that was for me to come in, to look at the overall market. What are the markets we could actually achieve? Which are the products we would have to diversify? How we can now differentiate ourselves from our competitors in the healthcare space? And then to actually adhere and achieve this. So there was a lot around motivation. I used also personal development methodologies for people to understand who they are. In this case, it was the Enneagram. It's one of the methodologies. And when people understood who they are, they could understand the beauty of the diversity of the team. And then we were looking at an overarching goal. And we did a very significant turnaround, where we did not only replace the revenue we were losing through the big contract rolling out, but we tripled actually the revenue overall just through individually diversified customer base and product base with a clear alignment of the team.
And look, I would argue that having a motivated team is great and definitely a benefit to have. But there are also situations where there's just no time for that, to work with the team and to all get aligned in which direction to roll. Situations of absolute crisis and criticality. How do you balance this need to get motivation in the team up, but also to produce results on a very short-term basis?
Great question. I believe there's always time. You have 24 hours, you have 48 hours, where you can align with a team, you put your heads together. Yeah, I remember that also on the sports side. I was doing sports on the high end. Yeah, the psychological portion is so important to really succeed. You can have a tennis player or football. Now we have the World Cup here going through. You have sometimes a team succeeding and suddenly something happens and it's no longer succeeding. So I think the mindset is the first part to tackle. And you need to do this very quickly. You need to get an alignment and understanding is what is the path. Now, you're right. When you go through a crisis, and especially when you do turnarounds, very often you do not have time. You will lose some people. You will have to take hard decisions. But at the same time, also you celebrate quick wins. Every quick win will help you to go through the crisis so that you come stronger out afterwards. And so therefore, it's quickly the mindset and saying where we want to go. Second is the team has the freedom to operate and might sometimes succeed or not, but because you don't have the time to have big strategic session, to roll out a strategic plan, it's really more through a crisis mode. And therefore, I think mindset, quick actions, you need to test and try, and then also celebrate the quick wins are critical.
What is your philosophy on the actual execution?
Philosophy on the execution, that for me is a victory is never a victory of someone. It is always of a team. Yeah. So therefore, you need to execute having the team in mind, not your individual success, because otherwise you will have people fighting against each other, especially when things are tough. Especially then who has the stamina, who can go through. Yeah, and who can make decisions despite being under pressure. And that brings me back to one of the lessons I learned also in my book, what I'm writing, is that it is very different. If you take a challenge because you decide to do so, it's a self-inflicted stress. And a self-inflicted stress is positive because adrenaline goes up, endorphin go up because you decide to do so. If you're stuck somewhere, but you ended somewhere, and that's where you get to have a risk of a burnout, yeah, and a risk that you feel victim to the stress, that's a very unhealthy stress. So even though a company might have ended up in a situation which is difficult and you now want to come out of there, it is important that you decide where you want to go and what you want to do very quickly, because then it's your challenge. It's not just the victim saying, I'm sorry, I'm here, it's difficult, the market has changed, whatever the reason might be that the company is in a distressed situation or in a problem. It is really the mindset that you take and you check.
Right. And I would believe that perhaps some of the aspects that you explained are said a little bit with the benefit of hindsight. You mentioned in your introduction that you worked in your corporate career approximately until you were in your mid-30s. What did you believe earlier in your career that your later experience actually changed?
Wonderful question. When you're earlier and you're about success, sometimes you get confused, yeah, because it's your career. You want to have a promotion, you want to earn more. And that's an attitude which is not helpful in an organization because, there's friction. For me to have to learn that it's about the team and I'm part of the team and I have to play as a team was one lesson I learned. The second lesson I learned is vulnerability is a strength and is powerful. Just to play your game and to do like everything is fine and you are strong and you succeed is not necessarily conducive to result. So for me, the team mindset and vulnerability is okay to do and is a strength, is something I had to learn over many years.
That is a very powerful lesson, I would say. If you could go back and advise your former self, what would you have said?
If I would go back as a young person, and this is also what motivates me right now with our startup, the agentic AI startup we have, is actually you need to first learn about what drives you, who you are, what's your personality, and what's your imprint. And you need to build on that because it's you. It's not just something out there, an opportunity you're looking at. That's number one. The second is you need to make decisions on your intuition, not fame, fortune, and power, which is only nourishing your ego because you will not self-realize on the long run. And you can see that very often you have sports people, as long as they're in the sports and their fame, fortune, and power is nourished, is all good, and then they fall off a cliff because it is not meaning. There's no meaning in being successful or famous, from a society perspective. It goes back to what is important to you, what makes you worth living.
Well, and after your corporate chapter, you explained that you moved through entrepreneurship and then into impact investing. And I'm wondering a little bit, you're coming out of this environment, which is very corporate, where you have structured, where you have large teams available. And then you went into impact investing. What changed in how you looked at and evaluated companies or business opportunities?
Yes, the first thing is when you're in a corporate life and you are successful and you have the so-called golden handcuffs, yeah, with all the packages around. When you go out of that life, you understand that the label is what drove your values and it has no value. And all your network and the skill set you have, you believe it's so. But at the end, you are just a number in a corporation. You're performing. Yeah. It is not a person. It is a huge entity where you perform wherever you are a certain function. And when you go out of there, you are basically initially with me, myself, and I. Yeah. You start over, you think about what you want to do so, and you understand which are people in your network you can really rely on. And then the many others, which are just there because they are loyal to a employer, in a sense. And that is psychologically, emotionally not easy. Yeah. You feel hit first. And that's what you need to understand is that the power of one of the strengths when you are out there is your actual network. And normally when you're in a corporate life, you don't have a network. You have suppliers, superiors, and colleagues, maybe some of the competitors. And that's what changes is when you go into an entrepreneurial pathway, the pressure you get is a very different one, but also understanding it that just having a label and the golden handcuffs might make you feel well, but there's individually for yourself very little value in it.
That is an interesting perspective. I think I never had anyone say it here that if you are in a corporate role and you leave that corporate role, you don't really have a network. Quite the contrary, actually. I would see that people argue that even in corporate, they are developing and actively building a network. Now, it sounds like that you perhaps have a different perspective. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, maybe it's also my age. You're much younger, and today natives, digital natives, it's very different. How you interact. But at my time, in a corporate life, yes, you had maybe a LinkedIn, and maybe it said your title there. Maybe you had some of the people in there, but you were not really actively building a network. I had to learn that, and I had to learn that the hard way once I was out of the corporation to actively create, and it just takes time. If you have your quote unquote so much followers there or the network on the business side. And I'm not talking about being an influencer, on social media, that's very different. But really on the business side, it just takes time. And normally in a corporate life, you don't own your time. Yeah. And you are basically, the network you do is around your suppliers, your customers, and your colleagues. So it's pretty limited. And if you go out of there, you're no longer part of them. Yeah? And then you need to build a different network, which also takes time. And that's the effect I just mentioned, that the value you believe you have is very much, based on the organization you work for. It is less individual unless you really expose yourself and do an entrepreneurial path, an individual path.
Now, perhaps back to the original question. When you went into impact investing then, what specifically changed in how you looked at companies or business opportunities? You had the corporate lens before when you were in business and you evaluated business opportunities, and then you went into impact investing. What changed in how you viewed business opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, if you are out there, if you do a startup, for example, or if you're independent, or if you're in the advisory side, you constantly have to do deal flow and generate deal flow. Yeah, in a corporate life, you don't because the machinery runs, they have their products, you have your colleagues, there's a customer base, all of that. And then you are marginally do different things, add maybe something, add another customer base, or find a new customer. The pressure is much less. Yeah, and you get your salary paid. While when you are startup independent or in a smaller organization, you constantly have to generate deal flow all the time. Yeah, and that is a very different pressure compared to living a life as an employee.
And then you eventually were successful in impact investing and capital allocation. And when you looked at a venture or an investment project or some opportunity to where to deploy capital, what is the overarching framework that you try to think about? What are you trying to understand about the opportunity first before you gradually move through the different layers?
Yeah, I've done a lot of fundraising on my side because I'm a marketing person. So I look at how the perceived value of a brand, product, or company, and I look at how to increase this because this leads to more partnerships, more sales, and of more investments. And that's how, I've raised a lot of capital, whether it's non-for-profit, for-profit, from different organizations, even for funds. Yeah. And I always look at the perception of the customer, the perceived value. Yeah. Because you cannot judge whether, let's say, if a VW or a BMW, or a BYD, yeah, the quality is less or more. It's a perception of things. And that's something you need to address very, very much from yourself, your value, a team's value, a company's value, a brand value, and that's something where I'll constantly look at. And this is where, for example, when you want to pitch something to raise funds, right now I'm doing with my own company, here again with the startup, is what values and how to increase the perceived value. Because an investor in milliseconds decides between fear and FOMO. And you want to have them on the FOMO side because that's exciting, but something is wrong. You goes, oh, sorry, it doesn't feel right. I don't want to invest because I don't want to lose my money. Yeah. So that's always, so to understand that even though you're working in the financial sector with impact investing, it is very much a decision to invest or to write a check is an emotional decision. So it's an important piece to understand when you want to deliver a value.
But how do you differentiate between, let's put it bluntly, telling a good story and actually a good business or good investment opportunity? Because you mentioned perception, and yes, there might be value that is created in attribution to the brand. But how about the underlying investment opportunity itself? Where is the return on investment? How do you differentiate between the story and the actual numbers?
Great question. So I relate always to people, especially when you have small organizations. Big organizations is different. It's late stage company, it's growth equity, and that's the team, and the market and the performance. That's very different. But when you go to smaller companies, it is always the person and the team you're investing in. How likely is a founder or the co-founders or the original team to actually deliver and to succeed? And yes, you look at the market, and yes, you look at the pricing, and yes, you want to see some traction, but very much relies on the people, their performance, their willingness, their stamina, even if it's hard to keep pushing. I think that's a key component to understand, which goes back to the motivation, goes back to someone being honest to itself, and also how infected a founder or co-founders are, to resolve something with a company or with a product.
And let's actually use this as a segue. You spend a lot of time around founders, around investors, executives, and other types of ambitious professionals. Over the years, what has being around these types of individuals taught you about what it requires to be successful in business?
Okay, so for me, primarily it's the mindset, what is in for me, but much more what is in for them. What are we resolving for? What is the wrong you are righting? What's the mantra? What is it what you're actually doing, contributing to society or to the planet? Because then something is bigger than you, and that gives you the power. You take the risks, even though it's hard. You will still keep going because what you do has a greater meaning than just simply, some financial gains for you and your family. And I think that's a key component for anyone, how infected you are and how much are you doing, which is something which is bigger than you.
Is this basically a way of saying that there needs to be an actual problem that one is solving?
Absolutely. Just to have another product, just to do the same. Yeah, maybe there are investors which are interested in that one. It is not me. Yeah, I look for some original ideas. I look for someone with a mantra to actually resolve something. Yeah, through a product, through a business, and with a team behind.
To what extent did this type of thinking play a role for your startups and the companies that you founded?
I only get involved in, invest in, or engage with companies which are contributing to either the humanity and or the planet. Other things I do not touch because that is my leitmotif to impact lives and share profits. Life is too short. I can do other things, but that keeps me going, and that every morning I stand up, it's a new day, some new challenges and something new to do, which is greater than actually myself. And that makes my life worth living.
This is very, very powerful of what you're explaining. And I'm wondering a little bit, looking back at your career, how has your own definition of business success perhaps changed over time?
Yes, when I started, success was the title I have, the money I earn, and the team of the size of the team I had, fame, fortune, and power. That was what I learned is success. And that has pivoted totally into onto actually the contribution. It doesn't matter how big the team is, how big your title are, how big your paycheck is. What matters is what is it you contribute to the world? How many lives you can actually impact? Yeah. What is the issue you're solving for with your business you're running? And that is a very different type of success, because it's not a success which is focused on nurturing my ego and is related to others. It is actually my true inner North Star saying, this is what I want to do, and this is what makes me happy.
And you mentioned during your introduction the term vocation, and that for you it was one big learning to find your own vocation and to work on it and to really crystallize it. And what has your work with, let's say, leaders and entrepreneurs actually taught you about finding one's vocation and to making it crystal clear to have an actual North Star that you can adhere to?
Yes, this all happened when I had my own soul search while I was doing business. I left the corporate job. And again, it was nothing against the corporation and my colleagues or the product and healthcare. It was all good, but it wasn't meant for me. Yeah, I needed my entrepreneurial freedom. I needed a way to innovate and create without being handcuffed in an organization. And that is one part. Then through the path, when I entered impact investing, I understood the power of capital as a force for good and the intentionality and the additionality of doing so. And that opened me up a totally new segue also, how to impact lives and share profits. So the people I get involved in then is that they are asking me, Florian, you do impact, I want to do impact, which goes back to your original motivation. Yeah, this is when you flip your own script by contributing to humanity and to the society. And this is the part where when you are in this path, and I've seen so many people at midlife crisis, accomplished people, they're saying, what's next? And I want to do something with meaning. And normally people would say, first you make money and then you do good. And I think it's fundamentally wrong. You do both things at the same time. And that's what I would like. I'm happy to see people to instill that portion on awareness, saying, hold a second, if what I do is catering to my own script, is actually resolving something for which makes me worth living, the power is much stronger. The stamina is bigger, and the meaning this gives to my life is at a different level. And that's what I actually, like to engage with people, with entrepreneurs, with people of all sorts. So yes, Florian, the thing is, if you know what you want to solve for in your life, you're in your zone and you live a very different life.
How do you find that? I mean, not everyone goes perhaps through this soul searching phase like you have when you left corporate role. How does one find its true vocation or purpose, as someone may call it?
So in my book, I have 7 steps. The book is called On Vocation, How to Align Your Purpose with Your Profession. Yeah. And the first step is the most important one. And normally it's the most difficult one, because you need to cut out noise. You need to go inside. You need to remember your earliest childhood memory. What has happened there you did not like. It doesn't have to be traumatic, can be traumatic. And then you go back and visualize at the end of your life, what do you think will have made your life worth living? And then you bring it in today in your skill set. Where you are today, what do you have? And if you combine this, which is your personality and a purpose, then you look at, okay, what are the sectors and what's the theory of change? What could I do with my calling, with my skill set? So let me give you an example. I was giving a workshop at Oxford University to the MBA students. And one of the students says, Florian, I've studied so hard to learn financial modeling, and AI will make my job obsolete. I will be never as good as AI in financial modeling. And I said, hold a second, let's work on your calling, on your vocation. And the outcome was climate change, so mitigation, adaptation of humanity in the climate change. This is a big calling. So he put this in the center. He's good in finance. And normally people go into finance only to make money. They don't really care about what the money does, other than, providing good returns. But now if you combine things, so then he was asking me, where do I go? I said, you can go to insurance companies. Someone with your motivation intrinsically on climate mitigation adaptation and your skill set, that's what insurers need. That's what financial services, whether you are infrastructure investing, agriculture investing, anything, you can go to the big FMCG groups, the Danones, the Nestle's, the Procter & Gamble's of the world. Yeah, you can go to mid-sized companies. You can go into a startup. You can create your own startup where you still say, I want to make sure that what I do addresses climate mitigation adaptation. And then I have a very different look at financial, my skill set on finance, my superpower, and to embrace a purpose. And that goes along, Florian, in many professions. Sometimes doctors are doctors because their father is a doctor, the mother is a doctor. Somebody says you should study medicine. If you do not have a vocation to heal people, being a doctor is a bad job. because eventually it will make your life difficult. So those are many, many examples where it goes. So Florian, it's not very difficult to actually go inside and understand and be honest to yourself, and then you see what to do with it. And luckily today with AI, it's even easier, once you have figured it out, and then you can look what are the opportunities you can go for. And that's actually why I created vocating.ai, which is an agentic AI gamified platform for people to go through the exercise themselves with AI only based on science, giving a feedback, and then make decisions for their own life.
How does it continue? You mentioned there are 7 steps, and I think we discussed now the former steps of this finding your vocation. How does it continue?
So there are 4 and then 3 steps. The first 4 steps are for you. First, your personality, understand who you are. Second is your script, your imprint, that makes you tick, meaning. The third is what you can actually do with it or for the world. And the fourth is how you can make money with it, which is basically the ikigai, the 4 components of the ikigai. And I've been teaching ikigai in the past. People say, oh, it's very nice, but how do I do this? It goes through the execution. Really go out, you reach out, you do the planning, you have the stamina, and you start to measure your impact. Yeah? You benefit financially, the impact you create, but specifically for others. So there are 7 steps to go through for you to actually live your ikigai.
Those were the first 4 steps. And then you said there's a second set of 3 steps. What are they?
And just as said, the 4 steps is to understand. By the way, that's the MVP we just finalized with students from over 20 universities right now. Yeah, and we do a publication on that. For the execution of it, you design your vision board. You then go into action and test and try, which are sectors and communities. Then you need to stay on course, because sometimes people get nervous. I need a job, or that's what others say. You shouldn't do what others say. You should do what you. So it's not necessarily easy for someone to stay on course what you want, because you get noise out there. And therefore, you need to stay on that course. Therefore, you need to make sure that it is your challenge and you create a stress for yourself, which is healthy, not for others. Yeah. So those are the components when you're now in the execution mode. And then you measure the advances you have and the steps you're taking forward.
Now, let's see if we can actually apply this a little bit in practice. And let's assume there is a senior professional who is listening, who's successful, but who's perhaps questioning the next chapter. And I fully appreciate that you underwent a few career pivots or professional life pivots. Where should someone start?
Beautiful question. Let me give you 2 things. So my eldest daughter, her purpose is caregiving. What did she do? She studied psychology. She does Reiki. Yeah, she added things around, understanding that's the way she go. She also tested teaching, which is not her purpose. It is caregiving. She went in an organization also on elderly care. Yeah. And she loved to work with the elder people, but not necessarily with the colleagues, which do not necessarily have the same motivation. It's more having a job. And then she said, okay, I go my own way. And she became a doula. Yeah. So at the beginning of life, doula. It's not. And so basically, it's in the US and in Canada, you have that a lot. You accompany mothers before and after getting a baby. And so she set up her Instagram, got herself trained on that, get some mentors, build a customer base, and there she is. And she tells me, Daddy, I cannot believe I'm actually getting paid to do this. That's an example of someone understanding what it is and then testing and trying. That's what I invite people. Now, the question you place is very different. Let's say you have someone in the mid-40s who has a successful life, has a family and a home and some finances, but lacks actually purpose because just having a job. And that's where I say, okay, let's do the exercise. Let's go inside for you to understand who you are. And the second thing is what you really care for. And then you look at the skill set you have, what you've been doing, because it doesn't mean that you pivot totally different. You want to continue building on the assets you've built over years, but then orienting themselves, repositioning themselves towards making a meaning in life. And those are the exercises I've been doing with many people. It's really individual. And by the way, Florian, it's not rocket science. It's first the awareness. Second, you go inside and then you look at the options. And very often things just fall into place and people understand. Yeah, that's why the people have asked me over the many years to write it down and write a book. And I just did it. And it's science-based. Yeah, the same is also with the platform. But Florian, the big problem is our fundamental flaw is our own psyche and our own education, that you need to make money and then you can do good. But doing good doesn't mean you help, because nobody wants to help. Help yourself. So therefore, it's much better if you put yourself out there at risk, if you go out of your comfort zone, and if you serve a cause you really care about professionally, because this is really contagious. And I can tell you many, many stories of many people who, once they understood it, they don't need any explanation from anyone, because it is coming from inside out. You are guided by your own intuition.
What else is there that we should have talked about but didn't so far?
I think a big component is to understand what's happening with AI. AI is disrupting, as we speak, fundamentally, the way economy works. You're moving from a knowledge economy where you need to be privileged born to study the years. You have an entry-level job to get seniority. All of that is know-how, know-how, knowledge you need to accumulate during many years, which had an economic value, which has no economic value going forward. You're going into a creator economy. Yeah. So if you ask the CEO of Palantir, yeah, he was saying recently that two people will have a success economically in the AI economy, which is neurodivergent people and purpose-driven people, because they know what they want. All others will basically have a difficulty, like the good old Matrix movie, which pill you take. And it sounds a little bit alarming, but there's a big issue in there. So even all trends say, and all experts say, that 40% of white-collar jobs will be wiped out over the next 3 to 5 years, because you don't need it anymore. Know-how and knowledge is no longer an asset. Your identity is your asset. And that gives it a very different positioning of understanding. If you know what you want, you can actually now do and create and have a living with in a very different way, because AI, besides being all of us, so many of us, concerned about what it does for the humanity, has also the blessing. It has been never as cheap, as fast, and as precise to create something than now with AI you can do.
And perhaps we separate at least two dimensions here. One is the anticipation of a future of a business state with AI. And I think the perspectives there are just so diverse. There are people who say, white-collar jobs will be wiped out in the super short term. There are people who say, maybe not, maybe the future will look much different. And we won't know yet. Nobody has a glass ball. So we just have to be prepared. And I think this is the second element. If you had to really distill it, you mentioned, okay, people who have a purpose or purpose-driven could have a benefit. But besides purpose, how should someone position himself or herself to be successful in an age which is more impacted by AI?
So I'm not talking future, Florian. I'm talking right now. We launched a company. We did a study. We have 20 universities jumping on it with students. Normally, you talk to them, to the career departments, they have all their things set. And I'm talking high-end, very famous, very well-known universities. And they all have an issue today to place their students. Ivy League universities in the US have no waiting list of companies to hire anymore, because you don't need young people anymore today. They don't hire. Yeah? So this is not future things. And yes, you can have some people saying, oh, it's not that much and AI will create other things. Yes, maybe. But right now, for the next 3 to 5 years, it is rough as we speak, not future things. I'm telling you this now. I'm not here to warn everyone. I'm just saying, Florian, the question you place is a valid one. How do you position themselves? I have 2 youngsters at home. They're 17. They're doing right now their high school finishing. And then they will study 3 years in a university, 5 years in a university to learn something. What? My daughter said, okay, maybe I study law school. I said, I don't know whether law school is a good thing right now. It's one of these things which a lot of things are just taken over by AI. Yes, you will have your lawyers and litigations, and there are certain components will mean, but there's a massive shift. And of course, it's easier in Europe because university doesn't cost. It's, good thing is it's government paid. And so we can see still with taxes coming in what happens. But you go to universities in the US, why would you pay $300,000 or $500,000 and take a student loan if it's not sure that you will have a job afterwards? So that the message is your identity is a key economic asset, whether the market change or doesn't change. And it will give you an inner guidance of what you do in your life, where you actually use technology in a very positive way. So that is my message to people. That's something which has now an economic value, which it didn't have in the past. As knowledge is no longer value, your identity is, I'm not talking just quote unquote purpose. What makes your life meaning? What is the wrong you want to right in your life professionally when you're a younger person? That's what I invite people to ask themselves. It's not rocket science to find it out. It is fun. It is contagious. And now, finally, it has an economic value.
Now then, let's actually start wrapping up our conversation for today. And we have a little bit of a closing tradition. And I'd like to ask you, what are you genuinely curious about right now that has nothing to do with your professional domain?
Okay, difficult to ask me because I don't divide my hobbies necessarily end my job, which is a very German culture, that you might fight and discuss with someone in the company to go outside and have a beer, because this is now private life, because I kind of all blurred, because what I do, gives a lot of meaning to me. Probably for me, part which I enjoy most and where I'm always learning is music. I'm my band. Music is for me like a therapy. It's not like we're rehearsing, we're more playing. Yeah. And that's the part for me where also technology has a different way and art looks differently right now. Yeah, we're playing around with, because I still believe human value and art and creation is beautiful. Yeah, if go on a platform and it does amazing music just by AI, it kind of, on one side there's a curiosity, on the other side I am not sure if this is the same, if this is appreciated the same way, because at the end, we human love to be with humans. And if I look at the recent study from Harvard University for many, many years on longevity, the factor number one for long life is social interaction. And that brings me back to loving music, loving to play music with my friends. And for those who like to listen to our music, sometimes in a party, in a bar, or whatever, that makes for me something where I'm curious to learn more with technology, but on the other side also it's important to my life.
And if our audience members remember just one thing from our conversation, one insight, one way of thinking differently, or even say one action that they should take, what would you want that to be?
Cut out the noise, go inside and listen to yourself.
Well, then Florian Kemmerich, thank you for joining me today and for this conversation.